I'm representing him in the wrongful death lawsuit, the civil litigation in which the estate of Yardley Love is suing him in excess of $30 million in a wrongful death suit. His criminal appeal exhausted itself about a year and a half ago, went all the way up to the Supreme Court of the United States. They did not ultimately hear it. And ever since then, we've been engaged in this civil litigation and done a number of things that have shed much new light about what specifically happened in Yardley Love's bedroom late in the evening of May 2nd, 2010.
All right, so let's reset a little bit. It takes place in 2010. The criminal conviction, it's in now, and you said the appeals have been exhausted. How comfortable or uncomfortable are you with that side of it as an observer?
Well, you know, he got a full and fair trial in the city of Charlottesville. I didn't play a role, and in fact wasn't hired until that transpired. And I don't practice criminal law, and I really can't speak of the specifics of that. But I can tell you one of the key issues in the civil case, probably the key issue, is whether or not his actions were intentional. In other words, when he went over to her bedroom that night, whether there was any intent behind his actions to harm and let alone kill her. And I think the evidence is, we've now done 16 depositions, which are formal witness interviews in the civil litigation. And I think all of the evidence points to the fact that this was just an accident. He's still legally responsible, even if it is an accident, but he certainly had no intent to harm her when he went over there that night.
You know, I'm reading, and it does say the beating death. I mean, could there be an accidental beating death? I know Cockeysville a little bit. I know the geography over there. I used to be on WCBM in Baltimore. So tell me what you make of the conviction. This is a conviction that looks solid. Again, I know you're not a criminal guy, but I'm just saying, are you comfortable that he's convicted of a beating death and maybe an accident?
It absolutely was not a beating death. Unfortunately, really for the media, within 24 hours of her death, the entire police file and the public records were sealed. And the media was really at a handicap. They had gotten the early search warrants, and that's really all they had to go on. And there was some suggestion early on that it was a beating, but all evidence since then has been clear that George never struck Yardley. He never beat her head into the bedroom wall. And frankly, you don't need to take my word for it as George's civil defense attorney. The Sharon Love family filed with Sharon Love, who's the mother of Yardley Love, filed a legal plea a week ago today in federal court in Maryland, in which she lays out the facts, and I think she gets them exactly right. George went over there. They had an emotional conversation in Yardley's bedroom. But when he left that bedroom, she was alive and appeared fine. And when her roommate showed back up 2 hours later and found her unresponsive, there were no signs of any altercation in her bedroom. The neighbor who was in the apartment below Yardley's never heard any signs of yelling or a struggle. The roommate suspected alcohol poisoning, called 911 with that report. And the paramedics survived. They couldn't resuscitate her, but the only physical injuries to her head that they noted were a bruised and swollen right eye, a small amount of dry blood under her nose and mouth, and an abrasion on the right side of her chin. She had absolutely no injury on the left side of her face. George is right-handed. If he had wanted to harm her, there would have been a lot more physical injury to her. There simply wasn't. And we believe what happened was they were having a heated conversation on the bed. They both had too much to drink, and they fell together off the bed to the floor with the 200 pounds of George's body landing on her head.
Wow.
Her injuries are consistent with that. And, now that doesn't absolve him, like I said, of legal liability, either criminally or civilly, for her death. But it sheds a whole different light on what happened than the original media narrative.
Well, help us all a little bit with that. Because when you were describing that they would be on the bed and they would fall, right? I mean, this does sound like a defense explanation. You're convinced that, in fact, could have killed her?
Oh, absolutely. And we have forensic pathologist, Dr. Jonathan Arden. He, for 10 years, was the chief medical examiner for the District of Columbia, did a number of high-profile cases, including the Chandra Levy investigation. He's looked at all the available evidence, and he concludes that he believes absolutely all the injuries are consistent with a fall to the bed. And there's an eyewitness, or an ear witness, I should say, to all of this. And Anna Lehman, who's now a medical doctor practicing in Houston, she lived in the apartment directly below Yardley's. She was there when this encounter took place. She heard George enter the apartment, and she heard George leave the apartment 8 minutes later and actually saw him walk away. The only sound she heard the entire time that he was in there was what she described as a large bookcase falling to the ground and hitting the floor. Now, this is the sound she's hearing.
Right.
But she heard no yelling, no screaming, anything. And the defense would contend that what she heard was the two of them falling together and landing on the floor.
Okay. Now, from the way that sounds, it almost is like, should he be convicted at all? I mean, is there, when you're having a fight with somebody, if you accidentally fall, but you didn't create the fall, you're still legally responsible?
Well, by all accounts, George was extremely inebriated when he went over there. He was finishing up a 30-hour-plus drinking binge. He had consumed over 30 alcoholic beverages during that time.
Wow.
He was a danger to himself and to whoever he encountered. And he is not, it's like someone that causes a DUI. It's a horrific act for one for which they should be punished criminally, in which they are civilly liable. But it is not an intentional act. And at least under the civil lens, there's allegations against him of both a negligence, which is a simple accident, and then intentional, what the civil law calls a tort, where we're arguing that he intended to commit this. And the evidence simply doesn't support the idea that this was intentional in any way.
Got it. So you're in on the wrongful death, which is where you collect from the person, right? It's a civil case saying you're the cause, therefore you owe money. Kind of like in the O.J. case when the family of Nicole and Ron Goldman went and sued O.J., but they couldn't collect. He didn't have enough dough, but you're on the record for getting damages from that. Is that right?
Well, that's exactly right. And a lot of people don't realize that it's a two-step process in a case like this. And for whatever reason, that's the way the law evolved. And the criminal conviction of George is completely inadmissible in the civil trial. You have slightly different evidentiary rules, slightly different standard of proof, and you, in essence, redo the whole thing. And, we don't know how Georgia's civil case will turn out. But the O.J. example you cite, it was actually, where he was found not guilty in a criminal context, but then he was found civilly liable and had the played out as you suggested.
Right. So when you come to the case, does this case look winnable to you when you take it, or do you think you're in for a rough ride when you decide to get involved?
Well, to be honest, Ed, this looked extremely difficult. It was hard to know what, if anything, would be able to say about it. But that was before we looked at any evidence. That was before we took 16 depositions and asked numerous family and friends of George and Yardley who had been eyewitnesses to this relationship for years and years before Yardley's death. And they, to a person, explained it as a loving relationship. It was not a domestic abuse type situation. There was never any prior incident where George assaulted, punched, struck anything like that. None of Yardley's friends had any fear for her safety, ever once suggested to her that this was someone she needed to stay away from. In fact, quite the opposite, and a number of them said they could have seen them going on and getting married and having a happy life together. Obviously, they were young. They were 22. Who knows how life would have played out. It's a tragic outcome. Nothing that we say and do is going to get Yardley back, and that is a great tragedy. But the legal system deals with situations like this. We now have this civil case in front of us, and the more we learn, the more we shed doubt on some of the early media narrative about what supposedly happened on that night.
Matt Green is our guest. In 2012, Matt was included in the Best Lawyers in America list. Congratulations on that. When this kind of case on the civil side is redoing or re-examining a case that went to the criminal side first, are you guys able to actually get more detail, more information, more testimony because of the difference in the standard of proof? Since you guys are going for money and a preponderance of the evidence, the other guys were going for innocent till proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Does the civil case sometimes allow for more understanding of what happened and more can get into the proceeding? It would sound that way, but what's the real difference there?
Well, you're exactly right, Ed. There is a key difference, and that is that we have the ability on the civil side to take what's called a deposition, a discovery deposition. And that's a fancy legal word, but really all that means is we can subpoena anyone with relevant information and place them under oath and ask them questions about what they know. And we can do it in a very systematic way. We have done, I think, 16 depositions in this case. The University of Virginia, where these two were students, is a fantastic world-class university, and its graduates literally spread all across the United States. So we've been to New York, San Francisco, San Diego, Austin, Texas, Palm Beach. You name it, we've gone, but we've had the opportunity to place the folks under oath. Most of them have been very willing to share the little pieces of what they know that become bricks to build a wall of understanding. And it's really, I've never practiced criminal law. They do things the way they do it for the reason they do. But what it's allowed us to do on the civil side is really get a full picture of a lot of the background, what this relationship was like, and what the real issues were. And sadly, in George's case, he had a real drinking issue. It wasn't being dealt with for whatever reason. Over the spring of 2010, it got worse and worse. If the guy had never touched a bottle in the 30 hours before Yardley's death, I'm sure she'd be alive and with us today. And it's a real tragedy and something that we're dealing with. But there's a lot of people with substance abuse issues, alcohol issues in our society, and a lot of bad comes from it. But that doesn't mean their actions are intentional or they meant the bad that comes.
Got it. Yardley's family is seeking to recover here?
Right, that's correct. It's the estate of Yardley Love. Her mother, Sharon Love, is the primarily named plaintiff.
Got it. Now, how do they assess their side of it? They're going to look at, his future, something like the kind of life he would have had, according to them. How do they come to a demand agreement on the money, and does your side immediately challenge that? And how did that part go? I mean, what are they really suing for, and how much impact did you have on the amount that they're going for?
Well, we have no say in that, and we have all the confidence in the world and the judge and a jury and the citizens of Charlottesville, Virginia, to eventually set the correct number on that. That's really a number that will be left for a jury, particularly in a case like this. It's almost an impossible exercise, and my heart really goes out to anyone that's asked to put a monetary value on a human life. If Yardley had been in a different life situation, for example, let's say she had worked for 10 years, had a record of earnings, had a number of children that she supported, sometimes some of that stuff kind of plays out as a math problem where you could project a future amount of lifetime earnings, and that would be part of the claim. A case like this, where she's a younger individual, had never married or had kids, really what you're doing is trying to set a financial figure on the loss of solace, comfort, and guidance that her mother and sister would have received from her over the next 60-some years that she probably would have lived. There's no easy way to do that. It would really be up to the jury.
When police officers, as in this case, go on television and say things like, "This is the worst murder scene I've ever been at," what is your offset to that? When it's got to strike everybody, even people in the jury box, judges, everybody's got to hear, this is not appropriate behavior for an officer, even if it's true. If that's true, it's the worst murder scene you've ever been to. The last thing you do is go on Nancy Grace or somebody and start trumpeting that to the world. You're poisoning any future proceeding. Tell me about when that kind of hyperbole gets in there. Is that something you have to knock down? Is this you wind up attacking the statement or the police officer?
Well, Ed, obviously that fact that you've described happens from time to time. it does make things difficult. I wouldn't say that's specifically what happened in this case, but certainly the police have an advantage. They have a megahorn that the media picks up on. If you're his criminal defense lawyer or any criminal defense lawyer, it is difficult to combat that because you're governed by the rules of professional responsibility for lawyers in the particular state in which you practice, and there are very specific limitations under the heading of trial publicity, it's called, under the ethical rules that govern lawyers. And there's a lot of things that you just can't say or things you can't get into. What you would certainly hope is that you could correct any factual misrepresentations to the extent that they are. And to a certain extent, the system works if everyone understands their role, follows their own professional guidelines, and you would hope that a trial or a media like that could and would be avoided in most circumstances.
We're talking about the conviction of George W. Huguely criminally, and those criminal appeals have been exhausted. Now the civil litigation proceeds in the case of a wrongful death. So where are you at with the case right now?
Well, Ed, it's interesting that you called me today. I'm actually parked in front of the courthouse in the city of Charlottesville. I've got a hearing at 4 o'clock. It's be relatively routine hearing. The judge will be setting it's kind of a scheduling hearing. The judge is going to set dates for a number of motions to be heard. Really, the biggest one from the defense perspective is we're going to ask the judge as a matter of law to throw out the civil claims against George that are based on the idea that his actions were intentional, that he intended to harm Yardley. We don't contest the simple negligence theory, the idea that he is legally responsible for causing an accident. That would remain the case. We would still go to trial, but we are looking at a trial date of March 6th, 2017.
Wow.
The court has set it for a 3-week trial beginning on that Monday.
Staggering, right, that they were targeting that far out. But okay, so job one for you is to get rid of the intention element, right?
That's correct, yes.
Once you do that, and it is, as you said, some kind of some version of negligence, you will still continue to fight the negligence. You said you're going to defend him on that as well.
No. I mean, he is still entitled to a civil defense, but George would be the first to tell anybody that he understands a great tragedy has happened here, and it is one for which he is responsible. And he never, on the criminal side, and certainly not on the civil side in which I represent him, he is not trying to absolve himself of responsibility. But the process only works if you have a trial, if both sides are represented. In order for the jury to get, it's an adversarial system, and for the jury to get a fair understanding of everything, both sides really need to do their job, present the evidence in a fair and ethical way. Yardley's Love's family is represented by some fantastic lawyers, really two of the best, probably the best civil plaintiff's attorney in Virginia and the best civil plaintiff's attorney in Maryland. And they will do a fantastic job. They will do it ethically. And I'd like to think I'll do the same for George. And as that process plays out, the jury will be given the tools they need to make some of the difficult decisions to try to put a dollar figure on this beautiful young woman's life.
Absolutely. Matt Green is our guest. We're talking about the case of George W. Huguely, the lacrosse player, convicted criminally in the death of his girlfriend and now facing a civil lawsuit for wrongful death. You know, you can probably help us a great deal with this next question because it's so common to media coverage of important cases like this, and nobody knows better than you, Matt, when you're up close and personal with it, what this does to families, what it does to communities. So let me ask it. It's abhorrent to me that the media would get a search warrant within the first 24 hours of its use, report on it, and it does turn out, according to analysis, that the wording of the search warrant was misleading. But as you know, you can't unring a bell. You can't take back what the public hears and hears sincerely the first time. So give me a good reason for caution and prudence on publishing search warrants of criminal, in this case, at the time it was thought to be a murder scene, right? And the description of the murder scene and the wording of the search warrant can do a lot of damage to poisoning the ability to get a fair trial. It kills me when the media does this. I know they think they're going to get more eyeballs on their newscast. They're going to get more clicks on their website. But give them the caution of the damage they do when they publish something misleading in a case like this.
Well, it does make things extremely difficult. In this case, the normal rule in Virginia is that the search warrant is the matter of public record. Anyone can go to the courthouse and get a search warrant. And in this case, they were allowed to do that for the first 24 hours, and then the prosecutor elected to seal everything, and then nothing could come out. And I would agree with you probably that I don't think it was intentional by anyone, but the original search warrant, I mean, the police have a lot to do. They had, a young person dead under suspicious circumstances, and, there's a lot to do within 24 hours, and it probably could have been written a little clearer. But then the media has that, but then everything else gets sealed. It made it extremely difficult. The judge did everything he could to ensure that George still got a fair trial in Charlottesville. But you're right. It's just a tough situation. It is hard to unring the bell. And it is a luxury that we have in the civil litigation. This is certainly now, over 6 years after Huguely's death, we're able to step in afterwards, after a lot of emotion dies down, and do it, and then just do civil discovery over a long period of time. We've been taking depositions now for a year and a half.
Wow.
It's allowed us the time to go around the country, talk to different people, and it's really like anything you would do in life. The more time you can take to carefully gather facts, you just get a clearer and more accurate picture that you're not going to get basing your reporting fully on a search warrant that is issued within, in this case, 12 hours of someone's death.
There you go. On my favorite TV shows, not to make you laugh, but I know you're going to chuckle when you hear this, it's referring to Law and Order here. But I think even the public, we know, when you get a hold of a document like that, a search warrant, and it's very specific and detailed, almost the first thing that either Sipowicz, my buddy on NYPD Blue, or Jerry Orbach on Law and Order, they would always get someone to read the thing and interpret for them. And, I think a good journalist does the same thing. Say, look, I got this search warrant. You get somebody who's experienced in the field and say, take a look at this thing. And they would see what could be misleading or not. Well, this caution, this restraint that I think I'm talking about here, we're losing it, man. This is the trend is pushing us away from careful consideration. But do you think now, as you go forward, you'll have a lot more control over this case and the way this case proceeds compared to the criminal case? Or do you think there'll still be media types, ripping at it, trying to get leaks, trying to get inside information, and again, not caring if it's misleading? Is the civil going to be any different than the ferocious energy put into the criminal case by the media?
Well, I will agree with your last characterization there. There certainly was an unbelievable level of media attention from all types of sources: print, radio, TV channels that typically would have no interest in something that occurred in Virginia or something that occurred at UVA or a sporting event or whatnot. I'm sure there will be some attention to the civil trial. I would think just because time and human nature, moving on to the next story, there'll be less. I really can't speak to how well the media will or will not do their job. I think you alluded to it that, as citizens, as consumers of media, as we all are, you just need to be objective. You need to get your information from multiple sources. If we all do that, we probably have a better society. We're
no doubt, right?
In Virginia, that we do have an excellent judicial system and excellent judges that have tools and mechanisms to help screen for some of that. So we think even in that environment, we're quite confident we can get a fair, and we will get a fair trial in the city of Charlottesville.
Gotcha.
That's really all anyone can ask for.
Well, it's a pleasure to better understand a case like this. I really thank you for your patience with the questions because, a lot goes on certainly in courtrooms, but just in the law in general. And the public really isn't aware and really does have a hard time putting one and one together. You've made it so much easier for us today on this case. Matt Green devotes his practice to civil litigation with an emphasis in the following areas: commercial, professional liability, products liability, and insurance coverage. He's involved in a very different case right now. It's the wrongful death civil litigation against the convicted George Huguely and the attempt by the family to recover from that. It's a delicate balance. It's a very important thing that you do. I thank you very much for your time today, Matt.
Ed, thanks so much. Your questions were very very articulate, very reasoned, and I appreciate you allowing us the time to explain a little bit more about our case.
Oh, you bet. Listen, I look forward to your return visit. I'll keep an eye on this case based on our conversation today, and I look forward to following up with you. You really did a great job of helping us understand the complex legal system, and congratulations on what you do. Many, many years ago, I sat in a classroom thinking I might be a lawyer just like you, and sometimes it gets lost in movies and film and sensationalism, but you are at the core of how people exercise what makes the country great, our constitutional protections. So thank you very much for that, buddy.
Well, thanks again, Ed. It was a pleasure to be on the show.
Care. That's Matt Green on the Ed Tyll Show, Starcom Radio Network. Wow. When you get up close to a case, when you're able to ask, it's what's so great about Matt, right? He's allowing me to just ask as a citizen questions that'll help us better understand how the system works, and also a great insight into how the system can get off in the wrong direction. You got a police chief going on the news. You've got all kinds of sensational media coverage. Doesn't really tell the whole story. Thanks to Matt Green, now we do know the story. The Ed Tyll Show, Starcom, Radio Network, AM/FM stations all across America. Stay tuned. We have the latest from Wall Street on Friday and a look at the weekend weather.